It's a base for a crank wheel.
Bon voyage!
Welcome everyone, StealthyShiroean here, and today I'm bringing you my review of In Sound Mind. We Create Stuff developed the game with Maximum Entertainment publishing it in September 2021. For any Humble Choice subscribers, you would have received this title in August 2022. In Sound Mind is a psychological horror game with a rather heavy focus on psychology, as you literally are playing a psychiatrist trying to grapple with what he's experiencing along with the issues of his past patients. While the game does have combat sections, it also relies on puzzles as well, which may or may not be to everyone's liking. But without further ado, let's get to the review. Starting with the presentation, the graphics were nice, but nothing that would blow your mind. I felt it did the job to convey what it needed for the player. The overall environmental design was easily the strongest point for its graphics. I liked how the 4 main levels and the apartment complex were different, allowing for changes in scenery and aesthetic. The first section you start shortly after the intro is a shopping mart, which takes place completely inside. However, the other 3 have bits that are inside buildings or outside in the wilderness, which was a nice change. The 3 other areas were a coastline with a local wilderness, a train yard with a quarry, and a forest. There's definitely aesthetic overlap with these localities, but it all makes sense because they are places that existed within or around the fictional town of Milton Haven. Actually, as a little aside, the dev team discussed how they originally planned to make In Sound Mind an open world set in Milton Haven with more locations to visit. Unfortunately, cutting their scope was necessary in order to actually finish the game, but maybe we'll see something like it in a potential sequel. While the environments are decent, I felt the bosses and enemy types to be rather uninspired save for the main antagonist and the boss in the finale. The enemies, especially being the ink blots, were really lacking for me. There's only 3 types, with 2 of them looking fairly similar outside of a color change. They do the job, but seeing more interesting enemy designs would have been nice. One last thing on the graphics, the game has a ton of batteries scattered throughout each level to recharge the player's flashlight. However, I never used it that much in the first half of the game because it was never dark enough to be necessary. I decided this was probably because the game's intention was for the brightness to actually be lower, so the flashlight was useful. I lowered the brightness to a setting I thought was right, and it helped immensely with immersion as well. What I don't get is why wasn't there a setup in the beginning like most games tend to do, especially for a horror game. As for the audio, the sound design is well done, and there were plenty of times where I was a bit unsettled from creaking or some other noise happening around me. The voice actors all did wonderful jobs embodying their different roles.
Don't you have better things to do? Alright, let's keep it moving. Right there, behind the ears. Oh, good. I get it, you like me. You can stop now. Okay, that's enough of that.
The overall soundtrack was decent in the moment-to-moment gameplay, but nothing that really stood out to me. However, for each of the patients, plus a couple other ones, you can find a specific record vinyl to play. These are all voice songs specific to the character, and they were all very good. My favorite was probably the first one you find, covering the protagonist's first of 4 patients.
Let you in, let you see through my broken skin, let you tell me people will love me, not get sick of me, get rid of me, when the world came crashing down on me. I did not die, I went to sleep, I watch you as I am dreaming, look away.
In Sound Mind follows a psychiatrist, Desmond Wales, who wakes up in the basement of an apartment building. However, things don't seem right. Things can shift around and notes are left behind taunting Desmond. Eventually, he gets phone calls from a mystery man who seems upset with Desmond and wants him dead.
There he is. Long have I waited for this moment, to watch as you scramble for your last breath, as you try to make sense of your reality and the gravity it carries, pulling you down. Ooh, I can't contain my excitement. I will have you, Desmond Wales. I will have all of you.
Along the way, the player finds tapes of Desmond's past patients that transport him to different areas related to the patient. Each patient has a bit of tragic backstory that delves into various psychological themes such as phobias, PTSD, anger issues, and suicide. You find out more about each patient in their respective areas and about the narrative conflict as a whole. Much of the story is actually told through notes, which normally I wouldn't like, but in this rare case, I felt it did a good job to convey the narrative. The story feels very fragmented in the beginning, but many of the notes did help put it together in a meaningful way, which surprised me. I felt there'd be a lot of holes to the point that I'd get to the end and not understand it. I will say that without reading these notes, you'd probably have to make a big leap to attempt to put everything together story-wise, but it helps that all the notes are fairly short so you don't feel like you're reading pages of exposition at every turn. Plus, the antagonist, Agent Rainbow, is kinda humorous at times. Overall, I liked the story. It kept me guessing as to what was actually going on, and it didn't really start clicking into place until the latter half of the game. I'm going to take a moment to share some thoughts about the ending, so please jump ahead to the next section if you want to avoid spoilers. So, nearing the end, it's revealed that Meyer, a pharmaceutical company, has been experimenting with a volatile drug known as Agent Rainbow that causes people to tap into this collective unconscious, which is the inherent knowledge of every person who's ever existed. I guess it wasn't that clear, but suffice to say, people can't handle that kind of information overload, causing people exposed to the drug to react in different, often violent ways. And the other side effect of the drug is people can communicate telepathically with anyone who had been influenced by the drug and tapped into the collective unconscious.
Agent Rainbow turns the people affected by it into a walking radio tower, transmitting and receiving knowledge and experiences to and from the collective unconscious. The people I've spoken to through the radio, they were able to describe to me in vivid detail places they've never been to, and people they've never met. It's like they have the internet inside their heads, and they're constantly uploading and downloading information. It's enough to drive anyone out of their minds.
I thought this was really clever for the bosses, aka Desmond's patients, that he encounters in their own bespoke areas. At first, I had assumed they were figments of his own imagination because it becomes clear that he's under the drug's influence. Instead, they were actual manifestations within this collective unconscious dimension, or at least that was my interpretation of the events of the game. This makes the resolution of each patient that much more meaningful because it's not simply a coping mechanism of our main character. Instead, he's actually helping his patients come to terms with their issues and hopefully find some kind of release.
It's okay. She will always be your daughter. You will always be her dad.
Despite the leaps and bounds in the logic of how the collective unconscious works, I did like it as a plot element. However, what I think fell short was the revelation of Desmond's cat Tanya, who helps the player out throughout the story. I mean, it was sad to learn that Desmond accidentally killed his cat by leaving out a plant poisonous to it, which it tried to eat. I think the reveal didn't have the buildup it needed to have emotional impact, especially with the additional reveal of a now ex-romantic partner. Instead, the resulting reaction I had from why his partner left was, oh, he's a workaholic and lost his partner. That sucks. It just didn't have the oomph I assumed the writers wanted. The game ends with a cliffhanger as well, and I really hope they make a sequel to it one day. Overall, I enjoyed the story and Desmond's psychological journey dealing with his inner demons and the demons of his own patients. The gameplay here focuses on 3 elements being puzzles, exploration, and combat. Each of these things do well to a certain degree, however, I want to get something else out of the way first, which is that this game isn't exactly a horror game. It is, but not in the sense that you're going to get scared. Obviously, this depends on the player's own tolerance for horror, but I think many won't feel this game is really scary. Instead, it felt more of a thriller with some horror elements. It actually reminded me a lot of Alan Wake with the game's overall feel. There were scary things the game had, and it definitely could be unsettling, but I wouldn't exactly classify it as a horror game in the traditional sense. In Sound Mind did have its moments though. The scariest level was the supermarket, mainly because you don't know what to expect yet since it's the beginning of the game, and the monsters stalking the halls you could only view through a mirror shard unless you wanted to be attacked. Plus, there's a ton of creepy mannequins. However, what got me almost every time was when this guy, Agent Rainbow, snuck up on me.
Not entertained.
I think these jump scares got me so easily because there wasn't any sort of tension building like is usually the case with the jump scare. No sharp noise or creepy music. Just 1 second you're doing your thing, and the next you turn around and he's there spooking you. Usually just a one-line dialogue and then disappears, but that was almost always enough to make me jump and curse at the screen. Okay. Now that I got that out of the way, let's get back to the 3 elements of gameplay. I'll actually start with the weakest of the 3, which was combat. The combat is passable, but not great. You have an assortment of weapons at your disposal, but I mainly used the pistol or shotgun, and at times a flare gun as well. This was partially because ammo was so abundant, but also because the AI for the enemies was simplistic. The enemies, or ink blots, came in 3 varieties: the standard melee, a ranged enemy, and the big guys. They patrol around until they see the player and attack. Supposedly you could sneak by them, but I wasn't sure why you'd go through the trouble since combat was so simple. Basically, don't get hit by the enemy and fire your gun at them. The same could be said of a lot of games, but it really was solely this. No real cover-based shooting, no flanking, no special tactics of any kind. It was passable as mentioned, but was easily the most lacking part of the game. It's a bit disappointing that the last section of the game with Desmond's final patient as well as the very final boss is largely centered around combat. The puzzles and piecing together of the story is definitely in Sound Mind's bread and butter. The boss fights, on the other hand, are a nice change from the standard combat loop. Although calling them boss fights might be painting the wrong picture, as they're mostly boss encounters. Outside the final fight, 2 of the 4 areas do result in a final climactic duel, so to speak. However, in all of them, you come across these monstrous entities as you explore each area. They stalk you, and it becomes a tense game of cat and mouse as you try to escape or keep a low profile to not attract their attention. Most of these encounters require you to use the item found in that section. My favorite was probably the first one where you get the broken mirror shard and you need to look through it in order to spot where the monster is. If you look at her directly, then she'll go crazy and attack, but you're safe as long as you glimpse her through a mirror. Each of the boss monsters were creative and had different mechanics that the player needed to do in order to defeat them. They also integrated seamlessly into the level design, which brings me to the exploration side of In Sound Mind. All the 4 areas were large enough that I felt like I could explore, but also small enough to keep the player's focus. There is a linearity in the exploration, but there are plenty of hidden areas to reach to find resources, such as health and ammo, but also essential for getting the coveted pills in the game. The pills are what really encourage exploration because they're the only way to improve your stats. To be honest, I wasn't sure how much it really changed, but a MacGuffin is still a MacGuffin, so you bet I'm gonna try and grab them. I did like the system overall because of the emphasis on exploring each level. However, it also did suck to get to the end of a level only to find out that you missed some pills. Some of these can only be gained by allowing the boss monster to destroy certain obstacles for you, and once you finish a section, there's no way to trigger this unless you replay the entire area. It also didn't help that I only realized in the second area that the broken mirror shard actually helps you find pills by giving them a glowing outline. Puzzles are a big part of the exploration as well. Normally, this would deter me from playing the game, but they aren't that challenging. Some require a bit of thought, but nothing that will outright stump you. Each of these puzzles are solved with the surrounding environment and with the tools you gain throughout play. I appreciated how many of these tools were still useful even in later stages of the game, allowing for a slightly more complex puzzle solving. They even create a Metroidvania feel to exploring the apartment area, which acts as a hub in between the exploration of each of the patient's case files. Many areas can't be accessed unless you have a certain item, whether it's the mirror shard to cut caution tape, which yes, does completely block passage, or the flare gun to get rid of shrouds of darkness, or the gas mask to protect herself from poisonous fumes. Generally, I liked the after-stage process of coming back to the apartment and trying to see what new rooms I could gain access to. And that brings us to the value and my final thoughts. But first, if you're enjoying the review or found it helpful, then please consider giving it a like, as that helps me out greatly with the YouTube algorithm gods. Inside Mine runs for $34.99 USD, and I put about 14 hours into it for one playthrough. The game is decent, but I really would only recommend it on sale. Personally, that's way too much for what's here. There are no different endings or choices to make, so naturally the replayability is negligible. However, I still recommend it wholeheartedly. The story was compelling and the gameplay was decent even if it faltered in some areas. The devs are currently making a different horror title, but I really hope they come back to Inside Mind in the future, especially if they're able to make something closer to the original vision for the game. If you played the game, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't, then let me know if it sounds like something you'd be interested in, or if you have any other questions. I hope this video helped you in some small way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.